Hello. Okay, this is the third time I am filming this submission. Um, Canvas kept deleting my video, so I am just recording right off of my computer's like webcam camera thing, and I'll submit the video afterwards. Um, uh, like I did in my last recordings, I don't know if they got lost to the Canvas or if they're still saved somewhere. I have no idea. But I did want to preface this by saying that this is the first time I am submitting an assignment in this format where I'm recording myself. So I'm a little bit nervous, and I am definitely a much better writer than I am a talker. I tend to ramble and I get lost in my ideas sometimes. Very like ADHD style, so I just want to apologize in advance. I just wanted to let you know I am just going to be reading off of my iPad. I'm referencing the bullet points that you have provided, and I'm referencing the notes that I have taken directly on the PDF in Canvas. I'm not sure because I'm not a professor, but I think that you also have access to my annotations, so you can definitely look at that. Just um, wanted to let you know I'm not reading off of a script. I did not prepare a script. Otherwise, this would probably be better worded. All right, so um, before I even like get started, um, talking about like in specific, like in detail, what the bullets are asking, I just wanted to basically give like a quick summary of what I understood from this reading. I'm gonna be honest, I had a really tough time like reading this and kind of like making coherent ideas and things that made sense just because it's kind of like a hard read for me. Um, so you asked about the ego, the ID, and repression. So I'm gonna try my best to summarize those before I really get into the details of the bullets. So what I got from the ego is kind of like what we show to the world. Um, I kind of thought of it like I have two examples that I've used. I think of ego as like our avatar. Our ID is like the person behind the avatar, and the repression doesn't fit into this example, but it's what the act of like what we're pushing down into our unconscious. And so I also like the way Freud writes about repression in our unconscious. He kind of makes it seem like everything in our unconscious is bad. Or at least that's kind of how I interpreted. Like everything is kind of like dark, or like things that are unwanted, things that we don't want to think about, like weird stuff. Um, so that's kind of how I'm gonna talk about it, and that kind of made me think. I'm not sure if you've ever watched Dexter, but it kind of makes me think of Dexter and how like his ego would be the him that everybody sees, the him that he's consciously putting out. Like he's a good brother, a good boyfriend, a husband, a dad, everything. But then his ID, his true self, is what I think is the ID, is like the murderer. So and then the repression is him trying to like hide his like murderous side. But okay, now I'm gonna get into the bullets. All right. So what are the characteristics of ego? Um, is ego a conscious or unconscious, and what does the ego represent? Okay, so on page 8, um, I highlighted a few passages that I'm going to read before I discuss it. It says, we have formed the idea that in each individual there is coherent organization of mental processes, and we call this his ego. To this ego, that consciousness is attached. Ego controls the approaches to motility, that is, to the discharge of excitations into the external world. It is the mental agency which supervises all its own constituent processes. From this ego proceed the repressions. Okay, so what I got from this is ego sort of is like what organizes our mental processes. And like I was saying before, ego is like what we're displaying into the world. Like this line that says ego controls the approaches to motility. and discharge of excitations into the external world. So ego is kind of what we're showing to the world, what we're displaying. And you would think from this passage that ego is consciousness, ego and consciousness work in the same realm. But we later read, excuse me, on page 16, I highlighted, because it's directly saying, as we have learned, the ego is also unconscious. So what I get from this is, it's kind of hard to explain how ego is both conscious and unconscious without talking about the rest, but I'm going to do the best of my ability, and if I have to, I'll come back to it. Okay, so it's conscious because it's what we're consciously putting out. It's what we're showing, like our conscious ideas and how we're displaying them in the like real world, and like our avatar, like how we're designing our avatar. Let's just think of it that way. And I'm sorry. I filmed this so many times. I have said this so many times. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Okay, so let me read the bullet again. So yes, the ego is both a part of the conscious and the unconscious, and I'll definitely elaborate on that a little bit more once I get to the ID and repression. So okay, what the ego represents. On page 19, I highlighted the ego represents what may be called reason and common sense. Okay, so with this and talking about what was on page 8, where we're thinking about ego as like the manager. I myself, I'm in a management position at work, so I think of like, what does the manager do, like what qualities does the manager have, what does the manager represent. And like this says, ego is very like logical. In the ego, it's like thinking things through. You've got to have self-control, and it's got to be practical, just like a manager, you know what I mean. So I guess that's what the ego represents. It's like what we're showing to the world, who we want to be, is what I'm thinking of it. And then the ID is like our true self. So let me move on to the ID. What are characteristics of the ID? Individual, repressed, and what it represents. Okay, so on page 17, I highlighted a few things. I'll read them. In calling the other part of the mind into which this entity extends and which behaves as though it were the unconscious, the ID, we shall now look upon an individual as a psychical ID, unknown and unconscious, upon whose surface rests the ego, developed from its nucleus. Whatever. Sorry. Okay, the ID is our unconscious. Like I said before, the ID is like our true self. And I believe the ID is kind of like what drives the ego. And this is kind of what I meant by like the ego's unconscious too, or what Freud is meaning by the ego's unconscious. Because although the ego is like what we're consciously putting out, the ID affects our consciousness, and it kind of like bleeds into the ego. And what I mean by that is like, Freud didn't directly say this, but it's kind of what I'm piecing together in my mind. The ID is like our true selves, like where our desires lie. And again, I think of it like the way he writes about it, it's like where our deepest, darkest secrets and desires are. But for more than just that, it's like, I think our experiences and stuff, and the things that we go through like as children, and what shapes us, we don't consciously think about. Like, I can't even remember like being 5 years old, but things that happened to me, things that I experienced when I was 5 years old, definitely most likely contribute to my ego, to who I am, who I want to be. But I'm not consciously thinking about that. It's just kind of already there, and it bleeds into the ego. So again, I'm gonna continue reading. It says, but oh no, that's not what I wanted to read. Oh, I'm going back to page 19. I'm rereading the previous passage. The ego represents what may be called reason and common sense, and in contrast to the ID, which contains the passions. So, like I said before, the ego is like logic and reason, and then the ID is like they're saying it's passion, it's our instincts, it's our desires, it's what we want. And I also wrote pleasure because it's like not okay, like let's say I'm trying to think of this. Let's say somebody okay, this is a little weird, but um let's say somebody has like a foot fetish. That's not something that they want to display to the world, but it's in their ID, and subconsciously they like look at people's feet. I don't know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, that's kind of like things that are repressed, and yeah, I guess that's what the ID represents, like our true self. And then I want to tie this back into like repression. So how powerful is repression? How aware is the ego of repression? So on page 5, I'm going to read some of the things that I highlighted. Powerful mental processes or ideas exist, which can produce all the effects in mental life that ordinary ideas do, though they themselves do not become conscious. Why such ideas cannot become conscious is that a certain force opposes them, that otherwise they could become conscious. So, in this phrase, in this part of the reading on page 5, that certain force that Freud is talking about is the repression. And the repression is like within the ID. And I look at the little image on page 18. I'm guessing that this is a brain that Freud provided to us. And I kind of look at it, and it kind of looks like repression is dividing ego and ID, but not fully, because if you see, like, it's dividing it almost in half, but then it also is joined. So that's kind of where I see the IDs kind of bleeding into the ego, although this part is like unconscious and this is conscious. They kind of like are together, you know what I mean? But because I believe that, to answer the question, repression is powerful. And the reason why repression is powerful is because repression puts these like strong desires, these strong thoughts, these strong ideas, and all of these very powerful things down into our subconscious. But I believe that repression is powerful because these ideas are very strong, and they're so strong that they still, even though they're in our unconscious, bleed out into our ego without us even knowing. And then to answer how aware is ego of the repression, on page 15 it says it can exert driving force without the ego noticing the compulsion. A holdup in a discharge reaction does the something at once become conscious as unpleasure. So ego is unaware of repression. And this kind of, the second sentence kind of supports my idea of like, although the ego is, although like all these ideas are becoming repressed, they still bleed into the ego. And in this case, Freud is saying that the unconscious becomes conscious through like unpleasurable ideas. So like being insecure about something, like you don't know why you hate your laugh, but unconsciously you remember some kids laughing at you because you have a weird laugh. I don't know, it's kind of like how I'm trying to make sense of it. But going back to, is ego conscious or unconscious, this is what I mean by, like, I kind of have to explain all of it in order to explain how ego is both conscious and unconscious. Because although you would think ego is fully like conscious because it's what we're displaying, it's what we want to be, what we're giving out to the world, it's unconscious because our unconscious thoughts, our repressed ideas, everything that is back there is still affecting, still driving our ego. Yeah. So that's kind of what I got from the reading. And again, I apologize if I was rambling. This is my first type of submission like this. and I am definitely welcome to feedback. Thank you.